What if the stories your grandparents told you are not myths? What if the answers to your identity were hidden in plain sight? And what if people across the world were independently uncovering the same forgotten history? Father. In this episode, I continue the journey that began with my father's voice, a journey that led me into a global awakening where Africans from every corner of the world are asking the same question: who are we really? And why was so much of our history forgotten, ignored, or erased? When I first arrived in America, I thought I was simply pursuing education and opportunity. But America gave me something unexpected. It gave me questions. Questions about race, questions about history. The more I experienced life as a Black woman in America, the more I found myself looking backward in order to understand who I was. What began as curiosity soon became an obsession. I wanted to know where my people came from. I wanted to know where the stories I had heard from my father, my grandparents, and village elders contained deeper truth than I had ever imagined. As the internet expanded, so did my search. Suddenly, I discovered thousands of people asking the same questions, not just in Kenya, not just in Africa, but across the United States, Europe, the Caribbean, America, and beyond. One of the first online communities I encountered was a group called Bantu Israelites. There I found people passionately exploring the connection between African oral traditions and the history of ancient Israel. People shared family histories, stories, migration narratives, linguistic comparisons, cultural practices, and historical records. What fascinated me was not that everyone agreed. It was that people were finally asking questions that mainstream history often ignored. Question about migration, question about identity, question about memory, question about what colonialism may have erased. I joined another community called Archaeology of the African World. There I encountered images of ancient artifacts from Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, and other parts of Africa. I saw discussions about forgotten kingdoms, ancient civilization, and archaeological discoveries, rarely highlighted in the Western classrooms. For the first time, I realized much of Africa history had been reduced to a few chapters in textbooks, while entire civilizations remained largely unknown. The deeper I looked, the more I realized Africa was not merely part of world history. Africa helped shape world history. Then I discovered digital archives dedicated to ancient African civilization. I learned about the empires of Nubia, Kush, Aksum, Great Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, ancient Ethiopia, powerful societies that had cities, developed trade networks, advanced knowledge, and influenced entire regions. Yet, growing up, many of these stories had received little attention in my education. I began asking myself, why do we know so much about some civilization and so little about others? Who decides which stories are told? And who decides which stories disappear? As my research expanded, I encountered communities focused on ancient Egypt, or Kemet. Many scholars and researchers explored Egypt's African roots and its connection to neighboring African civilizations. These discussions challenged assumptions I had accepted for years. They encouraged me to look at Africa not as an isolated region divided by modern borders, but as interconnected people whose history was vast. The more I learned, the more I understood that modern borders often hide ancient connections. One particularly fascinating discovery involved indigenous communities from other parts of the world. I encountered discussions connecting African experiences with those of Native Americans, Aboriginal Australians, and other indigenous peoples. Many shared a common story. Their history had been interrupted, their identities challenged, their traditions dismissed. Yet, despite centuries of disruption, they continued preserving memories through stories passed from generation to generation. That realization deeply resonated with me because that's exactly how my father preserved our history, through storytelling. As I continued searching, I discovered websites and researchers examining possible connection between Kikuyu tradition and ancient Israelite customs. Again, not proof, not certainty, but questions worth exploring. I encountered discussions about belief in one God, Yahweh or Gai, purification rituals, sacred mountains, naming traditions, community structures, and oral histories passed from generation to generation. Whether one accepts these theories or not, I found value in asking questions that had long been ignored, because identity grows when we are willing to investigate our own history. The deeper I traveled into this research, the more I became convinced of something important. Colonialism did not simply take land, it often attempted to take memory. Across Africa, people were encouraged to abandon ancestral names, who were given English names. Traditional knowledge was dismissed as primitive. Oral history was often treated as unreliable. Yet these same oral traditions carried knowledge across centuries. The stories survived, the memories survived, the people survived. I also began asking questions about Christianity. Growing up, many of us were taught that Christianity arrived in Africa through European missionaries. But as I studied history, I discovered that Christianity had existed in Africa for centuries before colonialism, before it ever went to Europe. Ethiopia had embraced Christianity long before many European nations. Ancient churches, monasteries, manuscripts, and sacred traditions still stand as evidence of that history today. This challenged my assumption I had inherited. It forced me to ask how much of African spiritual history has been forgotten and how much remains waiting to be discovered. The more I studied, the more I saw a pattern. History is often written by those with power, but memory is preserved by ordinary people, grandparents, like my father, storytellers, village elders, parents, people like my father, people who refuse to forget. As I reflected on this journey through colonialism, another question emerged. Why are some historical tragedies remembered globally while others remain largely unknown? The suffering of the Mau Mau generation left deep scars on my family and my community. My father carried those memories. My grandfather carried those memories. Entire villages carried those memories. Yet many people around the world have never heard these stories. This silence became part of my motivation for writing my memoir, because forgotten stories deserve to be told, and forgotten people deserve to be remembered. Today, I understand that reclaiming identity is not about proving superiority. It's not about claiming exclusivity. It's not about declaring that one group matters more than another. It is about restoring dignity, restoring memory, restoring voice. It is about giving future generations access to stories that were almost lost. My father's voice continued to guide me. His stories sparked my curiosity. His memories launched this journey. And every discovery reminds me that identity is not something handed to us by government, textbooks, or institution. Identity is something we continue to uncover, piece by piece, story by story, generation by generation. The so-called lost tribes of Israel may not simply be a story about geography. Perhaps they are a story about memory, a story about people searching for their roots, a story about communities reconnecting with histories that were scattered but never completely erased, because maybe we were never lost. We were never truly lost. Maybe we were simply waiting to remember. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe, like and share, and tell me in the comments below what family story, tradition, or memory has shaped your understanding of who you are. My friend, let's continue talking and telling our stories. My name is Mombi Mugambi. Until next time, Dayo. Kone kwao,